show. We have Miss Emily Vernon that would like to come up and give some poetry. Not a spoken word, but the poetry with the, how do you do it with the? How do you feel? Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Emily Vernon.
Good evening. I actually want to read you an essay as opposed to some poetry this evening. At one point in time, a few years ago, I was the membership director for an organization called the Nappy Hair Affair. And the purpose of this organization is based in Dallas. The purpose of this organization was actually to be a support group for people who chose to wear their hair naturally because, believe it or not, it's not always perceived as a good thing in our community. Women have to sometimes build up the courage to go natural. And so this organization provides information for people who want to do that, if you want to dread, if you want to whatever. They have a network of stylists that they recommend. And I was a membership director for that organization for a period of time, and I wrote this essay for one of their publications. It is also the title piece for my next book. So, if you will allow me, Reflections of a Recovering Tenderhead, or Just Like God Made Me. I was 12 and in the 7th grade. My sister had moved to New York. The Black Liberation Movement had snatched her from the provincial mindset of our middle-class Ohio neighborhood and into the revolutionary frenzy of power to the people. She, of course, not wishing to leave me behind, sent me tons of literature about how to take back our communities and our heritage from centuries of the white man's oppression. I was her biggest fan. And I wanted to please her at all costs, so Black Power became my mantra, much to our mother's chagrin. It was the early 70s, a decade of violence, anger, and change. Negroes had only recently changed over from being colored, and my mother was not ready for the shift to being Black. Then the 70s erupted from the belly of the civil rights movement, and the threat of civil unrest was only overshadowed by cries for peace across the water. And I went to visit my big sister for spring break. New York had always fascinated me, and so had my sister. In the midst of whatever element was changing her in New York, this radio and TV major turned model turned actress sent home an 8x10 glossy of her latest headshot. Mama loved those pictures and had a gallery of them on the mantelpiece, except for this one. In this picture, my beautiful sister had clipped the naturally curly tresses that flowed down her back in favor of the latest political statement, the afro. As I remember it, she had a halo of large, soft curls caressing her face. Her hair was short compared to what it had been, and even in her natural state, she was beautiful. Our mother, who took great pride in her Indian and French heritage, and the fact that she could sit on her hair when she was young, took one look at that photo and burst into tears. She pronounced her hair to be ugly and cried in spasms that shook her tiny frame. The picture made it to the mantelpiece, but every time she walked by it, Mama started to cry. She went into the living room less and less. Still, she let me go to New York for spring break. Since I had an ever-increasing stack of Black Panther literature in my room, I'm not sure how she didn't see it coming. While we had an impressive collection of Black literature, my introduction to Black consciousness came largely from my sister, whose mantelpiece photo was making Mama cry. So on my arrival in New York, this same sister took one look at my hair, trying desperately to submit itself to a white man's standard of beauty it was not quite able to attain, and decided it was time for a change. She called home to ask for permission, and having masterfully obtained it, we set out for the barbershop at the Harlem Y. The Harlem Y is famous for many things. for me, it was the sight of my rite of passage. The gentleman who offered me a seat in his chair had a kind face and a gentle manner. I seem to remember him looking young and wearing a large and rather uneven fro himself. He settled me into the seat, fixed the plastic cape around me to protect me from the vestiges of oppression that would fall from my head, and raised the chair magically into the air, then began to examine the task before him. As he parted my hair, a stillness seemed to fall over the shop. If I remember correctly, he called someone over to come and look, as if he needed a witness to confirm what he was seeing. "Little sister," he said gently, "what happened to your head?" I looked at my sister to see if I should answer. She seemed calm and curious. I saw her eyes move to his and saw a flash of alarm. She nodded imperceptibly and then asked on my behalf, "What do you mean?" There was silence for a moment before he continued, addressing himself to me. "Are you tender-headed?" I had never known how to answer that question. At those times when my mother and I made the pilgrimage to Usher's beauty shop, the only thing I looked forward to was the chocolate milkshake I'd get from the McDonald's across the street once the process was finished. My hair would be washed in one of the sinks in the back, then they'd stick me under one of those dryers that seemed to set my head on fire. Still, it would be worth it for Mama to be proud of how I'd emerged from the process. After the dryer, I'd sit in the operator's chair, usually Miss Val's. She'd have a phone cradled on her left shoulder, passing gossip that seemed to be much more important than I was. She'd scoop a big dollop of blue bergamot onto the back of her hand, part my hair, and say, "Baby, you ain't quite dry yet." Somehow, no matter how long I spent under that dryer, the hair at my scalp was never quite dry. And no matter how many times she sent me back to sit under that helmet of fire, it still would not be dry. Protection, I guess, from the ancestors on my father's side, from the sun that might strive to fry my brain. I wasn't that far thinking then, though. So I sit there, damp, scalped, and vulnerable to the woman with the grease on her hand and the entourage of hot combs and curling irons, whose attention was mostly directed toward the person on the other end of the phone that caused her to appear hunchback. She clutched it to her ear with her shoulder. Hot hair, hot steam, hot grease, and hot metal all collided with my scalp. The pain was tremendous. But Mama and Miss Val told me to sit still, and I tried above all to be obedient. I knew from experience that tears would move no one, and that moving in that chair only meant I would be subject to feel the sear of hot metal add to the napalm attack that was already in progress on the top of my head. So I sat still in the chair and waited for it to be over so I could have my chocolate milkshake reward. It was the result of this that prodded the barber at the Harlem Y to ask if I was tender-headed. My scalp made him witness to the years of abuse my head had suffered in the name of respectability, and he seemed overtaken with compassion and the desire to avenge the injustice. "No, sir," is what finally pushed through my lips. He breathed a bit, and the stillness began to lift. "You should be," he said, and followed with, "I'll try to be gentle." He was as good as his word, and when he finished, my sister and I walked the streets of Harlem, the two baddest sisters in New York. My natural spoke of my self-love to the world. In time, the scars on my scalp have healed. The physical evidence of my submission to someone else's standard of beauty faded. But the psychological scars took longer to heal. I wore my hair natural as a statement of rebellion more than cultural affirmation. When I got back home, my mother pronounced my soft, kinky halo as ugly and refused to touch my hair ever again. I missed that intimacy. I took the scars of that rejection and bandaged them with